Hello and welcome back to my forest readings of forest folklore. I came to a trail that used to be not very crowded, but it has become overrun with humans. All those humans. So I have managed to find a little trail off the trail. Not sure if we will see any humans while I'm doing this. Maybe animals. I would prefer animals. But yeah, here we are. I am at the chapter Mythical Denizens of the Forests and Woods. Spirit of the forest, witches, fairies, demons, wood spirits, wild huntsmen, and wood nymphs. This should be a really good one, and I might have to do it in 2 parts because this chapter is at least 2 times as long, maybe 3 times as long as the other chapters. So I'm going to try to do part 1 of this section now. So here we go. In the early ages, the forests and woods were imbued with a certain degree of mystery, intensified no doubt by the deep and solemn shadows which lay hidden within their depths. They were believed to be peopled with crowds of strange beings endowed with superhuman powers and characters, although partaking of human form. These beings were known under various names, and were of different varieties and with different natures. Some possessed benevolent qualities, seeking to do good to mankind, while others were of a malevolent disposition, ever trying to work harm. Among the former may be mentioned the fairies and other genial spirits, and the latter class comprised demons of every description. There was a sound off in the woods behind me. I'm not sure what that was. It was probably a branch banging against another tree branch as the trees are swaying in the wind. There were also elves, both good and evil, and witches, generally malignant. In Scandinavian countries, the belief was held that when Lucifer and his angels fell from heaven, those who fell into the woods and forests remained there, becoming known as wood spirits or wood trolls. The genii, or spirit of the forest, is supposed to exist in many different forests throughout the world, where his voice is heard in the rustle of the leaves or the murmur of the breeze. He usually lives in a tree, particularly if it be old and gnarled. In many of the northern countries of Europe, an old pine tree is his favorite abode, and many legends have been grafted upon such trees. The tree which he inhabits is known as the king of the forest, and he strongly objects to his tree being cut down. Invariably begging to be permitted to live, he is always depicted as bearing an uprooted fir tree. Many tales and legends connected with these denizens of the woods seem to have had their origin in the workings of nature, and the phenomenon attendant upon these, and many now well-known diseases of trees, were once attributed to the evil influences which the mythical denizens of the forests exercised upon them. Any tree of curious and abnormal appearance, an old trunk shattered with age or storm, moss-grown or hoary with lichen, would, to the primitive wanderer in the forest, assume a supernatural aspect, especially if seen when the shades of night were falling or blurred by mists. And even wreaths of mist, creeping noiselessly along, often assumed shapes which, to the eye of fancy, took human form. In the forest of Rugard in Denmark, there is said to be a leafless tree which, although it resembles other trees, is nevertheless an elf who strolls about the forest by night. Dire results would follow any injury to this tree. Witches mostly frequented those groves or parts of the forest where of old the sacred rites had been carried on and the sacrifices made. On certain festive days, they assembled in the sacred wood and engaged in their unholy revels, while the musician, generally the devil himself, sat on a tree. A solitary thorn tree, never apparently growing any larger, is often seen in a field, and these are considered to be bewitched. They should be carefully avoided at night, as a fiery wheel will come forth, and if a person does not make a hasty retreat, he will be destroyed. The Reverend M.D. Conway says that when Christianity was introduced into Northern Europe, the ancient Scandinavian gods became transformed into witches, and that the ash was their favorite tree. Thus, it, in many cases, became a tree of evil, and Dr. George MacDonald has embodied this idea in his romance, Phantastes. He relates how, in the forest of fairyland, the ash was an ogre, or probably the habitation of one. When the witches of Oldenburg were on their way to the revels on Walpurgis night, they were believed to eat up all the buds of the ash, so that these trees appeared to have none on St. John's Day. I need to resituate my feet here. There we go, that's more comfy. In the days when witchcraft was firmly believed in, it was said that anyone who accidentally found himself beneath an elder tree was at once overcome by a great horror and became delirious. The Russian belief, however, is that the elder tree drives away evil spirits out of compassion to humanity. The rowan tree was held in the utmost dread by witches, on the account of the mystic properties which were believed to encompass it. A branch of it, especially if in the form of a cross, put in the churn or cheese vat, protected the butter and cheese from their evil machinations. No one could be hag-ridden at night who had a branch of it in bed, and old people used to place it on their pillows to keep evil spirits and witches away, while a small piece of it carried on the person was a protection against enchantment. If a branch was brought into the house on Good Friday, no witch could enter. A very ancient song called the Laidly Worm of Spindleton's Hughless, alluding to its power over witches, says, "Their spells were vain, the boys returned to the queen in sorrowful mood, crying that witches have no power where there is rowan tree wood." Loudon says in the Arboretum that the last line of this stanza leads to the true reading of a stanza in Shakespeare's tragedy of Macbeth. The sailor's wife, on the witch's requesting some chestnuts, hastily answers, "A rowan tree, witch," but many of the editions have it, "Aroint to thee, witch," which is evidently a corruption. But Loudon adds, "Nares and Halliwell say, aroint thee is correct." When a branch of the tree was hung over a cow's stall or wreathed about her horns, this was effective against the evil eye and other ills. But it was necessary to repeat the prayer, "From witches and wizards and long-tailed buzzards and creeping things that run in hedge bottoms, good Lord, deliver us." It was once believed that if a man who had been duly baptized touched a witch with a branch of rowan, she was the one whom the devil carried off the next time he was seeking a victim. In Sweden, old women who dwelt in the forest were credited with powers of sorcery and were believed to have the wolves under their control. Thus they were known as Vargamor or wolf crones. In Indian villages, wizards and witches are discovered by the aid of the sal tree, Shorea robusta or Vatica robusta. The names of all the women in the village over 12 years of age are written on the bark of branches of the tree. These branches are then steeped in water for 4.5 hours. If after that one of them withers, the woman whose name is written on it is deemed to be a witch. The wizards or conjurers called Quibet of the Apadones, a South American tribe of Argentina, were believed to have unparalleled powers over the forces of nature, as well as over all animals, and even over the spirits of the dead. These powers were imparted to them through diabolical agency, and Mr. Tyler says that Father Dobrizhafen, in his account of the Abapones, 1822, thus described their method of obtaining these powers. Those who aspire to the office of juggler are said to sit upon an aged willow, overhanging some lake, and to abstain from food for several days until they begin to see their futurity. The fairies of popular belief are tiny creatures, ever dancing on the greensward in the merry moonlight, and ever ready to lend a helping hand to embarrassed mortals. Forests were their favorite resorts, and on clear moonlit nights, they and the elves were believed to dance hand in hand around the trees, and the grass being trodden down by their aerial feet grew up with renewed vigor and formed green circles known as fairy rings. They had their abodes in flowers and lived on the honey. Shakespeare and Spenser have immortalized them, and Dr. George MacDonald tells how anodes entered a garden, and the whole garden was like a carnival with tiny, gaily decorated forms in groups, assemblies, processions, pairs or trios, moving stately on, running about wildly, or sauntering hither or thither. From the cups or bells of tall flowers, as from balconies, some looked down on the masses below, now bursting with laughter, now grave as owls. But even in their deepest solemnity, seeming only to be waiting for the arrival of the next laugh. Some were launched on a little marshy stream at the bottom in boats chosen from the heaps of last year's leaves that lay about curled and withered. These soon sank with them, whereupon they swam ashore and got others. Those who took fresh rose leaves for their boats floated the longest, but for these they had to fight, for the fairy of the rose tree complained bitterly that they were stealing her clothes and defended her property bravely. He adds that in the forest, here and there, whole mighty trees glowed with an emitted phosphorescent light. You could trace the very course of the great roots in the earth by the faint light that came through, and every vein on every leaf was a streak of pale fire. Spenser in the legend of Sir Calidore says, "But nymphs and fairies on the bank did sit in the wood's shade which did the waters crown." And a little further on he tells how, when Calidore gazed on the 100 naked maidens lily-white that danced around the graces, he wist not, whether it were the train of beauty's queen, or the nymphs or fairies, or enchanted show, with which his eyes mote have deluded been. Milton also wrote of fairy elves whose midnight reveals by a forest side or fountain some belated peasant sees. And again he wrote of fairy damsels met in forests wide by knights of Logres or of lions, Lancelot or Peleus or Pellinore. The hawthorn tree was in great favour with them, as their trysting places were believed to be under its shade, and in some parts of Brittany and Ireland it was considered dangerous to pluck even a leaf from old and solitary trees, especially those growing in unfrequented spots on the moorlands. Each country had its own type of fairy, but it would appear that the idea was far more fancifully and daintily developed in England than in any other, though the nymphs and the dryads of Greece and Italy were closely akin to them. A race of beings related to the goblin or brownie is the Nyagrusar, mentioned in Norwegian lore as peculiar to the Faroe Islands. These are very small, wear red caps, and dwell in the high trees planted round houses. As they are considered to be bringers of luck, care is taken not to fell the trees, especially the very old ones which they inhabit. Demons were another class of beings who frequented forests in many instances, as will be seen, living in trees, particularly one called Norg, who inhabited the hollows of trees, and it is believed that the French word ogre gave rise to that name. Germany, among other Central European countries, is where the forest demon is seen at its best, or his worst. In Sweden, certain trees believed to be inhabited by genii were called botra trees. Resemblances have often been alleged to have been found between human life and the trees Resemblances have often been alleged to have been found between human life and the life of trees. In fact, it has been believed that mankind had origin as a tree, so it is not surprising to find trees credited with inhabitants possessing powers of good or evil, or that such, in course of time, came to be looked upon as divine and were worshipped accordingly. The belief in wood spirits or forest spirits seems to have arisen, as Professor Manhart thinks, from the widespread idea that each forest and even each tree in it had their own peculiar spirits. Very often the color of these spirits was green and their skin was of a mossy texture, while at certain times they were able to appear as veritable men and women. In Germany and the Scandinavian countries generally, the belief in these wood spirits was very common and was implicitly held, and their duties were supposed to consist in looking after the forest in general and shielding the trees from injury. For instance, a wood spirit named Pulch dwelt in the Kammer forest who chastised those who stole wood or did injury to the forest trees. Another type of wood spirit was the Waldgeister, and anciently, the forests were supposed to contain these in large numbers, some being of a benevolent disposition and others the reverse. It is said that they alone of all forest spirits possessed the secret of medicinal plants. One of them was known as the Hild Moor, Elder Mother, or Hildvind, Elder Queen, as she was believed to reside in the elder trees and to avenge all injuries done to her place of abode. Should any person desire to cut down an elder tree or take a branch therefrom, he had first to ask permission from the Hild Mower. Otherwise, some misfortune would befall him. The Skogsra was a temple spirit haunting the woods and forests of Sweden. She was young and small, beautifully dressed, and of a friendly disposition, but had claws instead of nails. It was unlucky for hunters to meet her, although she could be propitiated by being offered part of the hunter's catch. What were known as woodwives frequented the old sacred forests or groves, and apparently it had been they who had formed the court or escort of the ancient gods when they sat enthroned on the trees. There is a phone call coming in. I will just decline that. It's probably going to make a voicemail message sound in a minute. Okay, where was I? These woodwives were principally found in southern Germany, but varieties of them are mentioned in northern Germany and in Scandinavia. They were in the quarry of the wild huntsman, but were saved from him if they could reach a tree with a cross on it. In fact, the foresters, when felling trees, used to cut 3 crosses on a part of the tree. The little woodwives would go and sit in the center of these, and there they were secure. There is a German superstition which says that on Ash Wednesday the devil hunts the little woodwife through the forest. These little woodwives are said to approach people when they are baking and ask that a cake might be baked for them, or else they appear with a little broken wheelbarrow and request that it be mended. They also often appear to the woodcutters asking for food, though frequently they help themselves out of the pot, yet they never fail to give a handsome recompense. This usually takes the form of chips of wood which turn into gold. It is believed that every time the stem of a young tree is twisted till the bark comes off, a woodwife dies. In Sweden, a woodwife, the Skogsra, mentioned above, is known to be present when a violent whirlwind occurs, and the trees are shaken, even to the breaking point. Some German races worshipped a woodwife between Christmas and 12th day. Occasionally, the woodwife was known as the wishwife, and her clothes were believed to be kept in an oak tree. A certain type of woodwife was called Dierenweibel. Very often appearing clad in white, but in one of the forests of Bavaria, the Dierenweibel used to appear dressed in a red frock and carrying a basket of fine apples. She would give away these apples, which became changed into money. She often requested people to accompany her, and if they refused, she returned into the wood weeping. Children, when playing, would frighten each other by exclaiming, "Here comes the dern weeble." Jacob Grimm gives the following further information regarding these woodwives. Quoting Buconia, he says that in Schluchtern would stand the wild houses and wild table often visited by the wild folk. That because the woodwives wail and cry, there is a saying in Germany, when anyone makes an outcry about trifles, you cry like a woodwife. That the Holzfrau is shaggy and wild, overgrown with moss, and that in Bavaria, on the Finns weeble is spotted and wears a broad-rimmed and that in Bavaria, on the Finns weeble is spotted and wears a broad-brimmed hat. We also learn how, when the poet had missed his way in a wooded wild, he became upon a wailing wife beside the murmuring stream, who imparted advice and information to him. Again, he tells how, on a May morning, the poet was roused from sleep by a passionate cry. He started up, went into the forest, and climbed over steep rocks until high up he reached a pleasant flowery vale, where, in the dense thicket, he spied a little wight. The latter scolded him soundly and wished to immure him for trampling on his lady's roses. Then, pacified at last, he told him that in a stronghold here, Dame Honor with 5 maidens of her household dwelt. Another legend narrates that in Maytime, the poet, when wandering in the depths of the forest, was met by a hairy woodwife who guided him to the tower of Dame Charity, showed him through her chambers, and at last brought him before the high dame herself. After his interview with her, she sent him away laden with treasure. The moss folk, or moss women, are but variations of the woodwife, and other names for them are wild folk, forest folk, or wood folk. These are considered to be dwarves, and they live in communities. They are gray and old-looking and are hideously overgrown with moss, giving them a hairy appearance. Voigtland tradition makes the wild huntsman appear as one of them. The author of the fairy family has described them thus: a moss woman, the haymakers cry, and over the fields in terror they fly. She is loosely clad from neck to foot in a mantle of moss from the maple's root, and like lichen gray on its stem that grows is the hair that over her mantle flows. Her skin, like the maple rind, is hard, brown and ridgy and furrowed and scarred, and each feature flat like the bark we see where a bough has been lopped from the bole of a tree. When the newer bark has crept healingly round and laps over the edge of the open wound, her knotty root-like feet are bare, and her height is an ell from heel to hair. In Tyrol, there is a tradition that a spirit called the Salgfraulein, who is dressed all in white, sits under an old larch tree singing. Numerous demons are believed to dwell in the German forests, where they often have their abode in trees. A certain demon or goblin of the trees is called Baumessel, or ass of the trees, and another, a forest demon or monster, partaking of the character of a satyr, is called Bachman, or man-goat. He is said to frighten little children who go into the forest. The Askefraue, Eschenfrau, or wife of the ash, was a very evil spirit and did much damage. To propitiate her, it was necessary to make a sacrifice on Ash Wednesday. There's a certain female demon, or perhaps more correctly goblin, who is the genius of the juniper tree and personifies it. She is called Frau Watchholder and is invoked to make thieves give up their booty. The procedure is as follows. Those who have suffered the loss repair to a juniper bush bend one of its branches to the ground, keeping it down with a stone while calling on the thief. The latter is bound to present himself and give up his prize. They then let go the branch and put the stone back in its place. A demon called the Katzenweit haunts the forests of the Fichtelge Burge, and to frighten children, people will say, "Hush, the Katzenweit will come." In the forests of the Harz, a similar being known as the Gubitch roams the woods. As does another called the Rubazal in the forests of the Riesensberg. In the forests of Franconia, there is a demon known as the Bilberry Man, who is apt to attack travelers when passing through the woods. To avert these attacks, it is customary for a person to place an offering of bread and fruit on a stone before he enters the forest, in order to propitiate the demon. We hear very little of fairies in Germany, at least as they were known in Britain, probably owing to the coarseness of the Teutonic mentality being unable to appreciate the delicacy of these ethereal beings. But beings very similar appear to have been believed in, as it is said that they possessed, along with the Waldgeister, the secret of medicinal plants, and from time to time made some of these secrets known to their favorites among mortals. Elves, however, closely akin to the fairy race, were well known and appeared in many tales and legends. They were said to be the children of witches by the devil, and would assume at will many various forms, such as butterflies, caterpillars, and others. The witches could conjure them into many things, sometimes into the stem of a tree in the shape of a caterpillar, and as it bored the tree or others ate the foliage, so the hearts of those people were troubled whom the witches desired to injure. This is an instance of how natural phenomenon came to be regarded as due to supernatural influences, and Shakespeare, taking advantage of the belief in these beings, tells in Tempest that Prospero reminds Ariel how Sycorax the witch did confine thee, by help of her more potent ministers, and in her most unmitigable rage, into a cloven pine, within which rift, imprisoned, thou didst painfully remain 12 years, where thou didst vent thy groans, and that it was mine art, when I arrived and heard thee, that made gape the pine and let thee out. Prospero then lays his commands on Ariel, threatening that if more thou murmurest, I will rend an oak and peg thee in his knotty entrails till thou hast howled away 12 winters. These elves were of a somewhat malicious disposition. They usually resided underground, but in some cases made the forests their abode, where trees were their homes, and the holes so often found in oak trunks were supposed to be their means of entrance and exit, while to them were also ascribed the knotholes found in timber. Grimm mentions a tale told in Smaland regarding the ancestress of a certain family as being an elf maid. It was said that she came into the house through a knothole in the wall, along with the sunbeams, and married the son of the house. She bore him 4 children, and then vanished in the same way she had come. And that is all I am reading for today. We are on page 95 of Forest Folklore, Mythology, and Romance. And this actually turned out to be a very, very nice spot. It's quite lovely. I do still hear that tapping off in the distance. It's definitely a tree branch knocking up against another tree. All right. I will film the next part soon. Merry meet and meet again, I guess.